And welcome to another episode of my podcast. On my podcast, we talk about how you can learn how to be a web developer or a software developer. And today we're going to talk about variables. So, what are variables? What do they do? Well, you can think about a variable as a holder or a box. For instance, let's say that you go to a store and go get a box because you're moving. And you buy a couple boxes, bring them home, and you start to label these boxes. So, for instance, you may pack away your plates, and in this box are plates. And what would you put on this box? Well, obviously, you'd put plates. Well, what about when you packed away glasses? What would you put in that box? How would you label that box? Well, you would label it glasses. Now, the same thing is just like in a computer program. Computers need to know what you want to do with certain information. So, for instance, if we want to store the variable name plates, we would say const plates equals plates. Now, inside this variable here, we can think of this variable as a box. And inside this box, we're storing a string with the name of plates. And why is this useful? Well, we can kind of think back to our analogy of when we're moving. When we're moving, we wouldn't name a box from the kitchen bedroom 1, would we? No, that wouldn't make sense, right? So you would want to make sure that when you got to your new house or your new home or apartment or whatever, that when you place these boxes inside, or whoever's moving them, place them inside, they know exactly where they're going to go. Kitchen stuff will go in the kitchen, bedroom stuff will go in the bedroom, garage stuff goes in the garage. So the same thing with a computer program. You want to make sure that when you create these boxes or these variables, you are naming them appropriately. And these variables hold places in memory, in computer memory, where you can reference these things later. So you can think about the moving analogy. You pack them in a box so that you can use or reference them later. So we can kind of think of the plates analogy. Let's say that we wanted to make this an array, and we'll go over arrays later. But let's say that we have a number of plates. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, what can we do with this variable? Well, we now can reference this variable anywhere else in our code. So we can say plates here, and we can actually console log this out, and we can see what our plates actually are. So we can console log, and console logging is a way to print information or log things to the console. So we'll console log plates, and we can put in I have, and we can put in plates. Plates. And we can console log this here. And we'll run this. Node. And I have, and we see our array, right? And we even see our string printed down here too, right? So there are many things that you can do with plates, many different things that you're able to do with these variables. And these variables are extremely important concept in computer programming. Now, the way that I declared this variable here, you'll notice that what we're writing in right now is JavaScript. But this can be applied to any language at all. I just so happen to be writing in JavaScript. For instance, in Python, plates, this variable would be plates equals plates. and Python would know exactly what this is. But right now, we're writing in JavaScript. And in JavaScript, there are a couple different ways to declare or create your boxes or your variables. So the first way is with the var keyword. So we can say var house equals, or we can say house equals 1, right? So var house equals 1. So this is one way to declare a variable in JavaScript. Var is something that isn't traditionally used a lot anymore, but it's still valid JavaScript and can be used. There are some caveats that you have to take into consideration when you're using var, but we won't get into those right now. It's just important to know that this exists. The next way that you'll see, most commonly way that you'll see, is const. You'll say const home equals 2. And this is the way that you'll usually see variables declared. Now, why are const variables really good? Well, we can think of the analogy of our box. So we're packing things up at home, and sometimes when we have our box, we know that we don't want to put anything else inside this box. We know that once we pack this stuff up, there really isn't anything else that we want to put in this box. We know that this is going to be, for instance, this is going to be homeware or plates or cups or whatever it is. So once we put something in this box, we would put permanent ink or permanent marker. We'd write that in permanent marker. And permanent marker, as you of course know, is really hard to erase, right? You can scratch it out, but really with permanent marker, the thought is that we're not going to change it. So the same thing with a const is it's a constant variable, or a variable whose insides or whose package or the value inside that box, the value inside that variable is not going to change. And when you try to reassign or put something else inside that box, then JavaScript complains. So let's see if we can reassign this. Home equals 3. And let's console.log home. What do we get? What happens? Well, let's take a look. Uh-oh. We got an error. So what does this error say here? Errors are a great way to figure out what your code is doing and what you can do in a program and what you cannot do in a program. So let's take a minute and read this error. So it says type error, assignment to const variable. So what does this mean? Well, we can see here that home was already declared with the value of 2. Now we're trying to change home to 3. But because this is a constant, JavaScript will not allow us to reach inside the box and change what's inside the box. In order to do that, we would need to create a new variable and store that in there. So we can say something like const person equals Jeff. And now we have a new variable. So those are consts. Consts you don't change. And this is useful in your program because a lot of times, especially if you use something like var, your variables can change sometimes without you even knowing it. So what is another type of way that we can actually declare a variable? So another way that we can declare a variable is we can say let name equal John. So what does this do? Well, we can actually reassign this name. So unlike const, where we couldn't reassign the name, we couldn't reassign the variable, we can reassign this variable. So let's console log the name, what's the value of this variable. So let's console log that. So we'll clear the console. log this out, and we see John. But let's reassign this. And we'll reassign this to Tim. Now, what do you think is going to print out in the console? Well, let's see. So we'll save that, and now we'll run it. Now it's been changed to Tim, right? Because name has been reassigned. This can be helpful if in your program you actually do want to change. Now, you may say, well, I know that with var you can reassign variables, and with let you can reassign variables. But what's the main difference between let and var? Well, scoping. We'll get into that in a later course, but really right now, the only important thing to know is that when someone sees let in your program, they know that this variable is possibly going to change. When someone sees const in your program, they know this variable is a constant, or this variable will not change. This is something that's going to be permanent. It's written in the box with permanent ink. So what have we learned today? Well, we've learned that variables can be declared in 3 different ways: with var, with const, and with let. And we've learned that var and let allow you to reassign, or actually go inside the box and change out what that value is inside that box. Const, on the other hand, does not let you change what's inside the box, or the property, or the value that's inside the variable. We also learned that const allows you to keep things static, or the same. We also learned that we really want to make sure that we name variables appropriately. For instance, we wouldn't want to say let A equal John. That doesn't quite make sense, right? It's almost like when you're moving, take that analogy again, we would write A on the box that's kitchen supplies. Someone who's moving things around into a new place, or even you yourself, you won't even know exactly what that means until you actually open the box. So we want descriptive names for variables, and this goes in any programming language. The more descriptive your variable, the better, so that not only you will know what this variable is, but other people working in your code will know what this variable is. So hopefully this gives you a good idea of variables and how they can be applied in not only JavaScript, but other languages as well. Hopefully you'll join me in the next video, and we'll go over some other topics that you can use in a wide variety of languages. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you in the next one.